Hey, TubeDude here again. Glad you could join me for my little video on how to make your own spinner lures using wire, beads, and blades. And I've been using some kind of spinner virtually all my life, and I'm an old guy. First started using them back in Idaho when I was a kid, and all my relatives fished for trout with spinner and worm mostly. So that's how I learned to fish. Later on in the summer, when there were bugs around, sometimes we'd change the worm for a grasshopper or some kind of bug, and they worked too. Later on, I started tying my own flies, and when I had some that actually worked to catch fish, I put some of those on the spinners, took the bait hooks off, and put the flies on, and they worked just well enough to encourage me to keep on with my foolishness. So, still later, when I started making my own lead head jigs, I found a way to put some wire, beads, and blades on those and make entirely different lures. And over the years, I've come up with some pretty unique designs on some little lures that work pretty well, at least to catch a lot of fish for me and some of my fishing buddies. Now, some of these lures, I'll go ahead and show you a couple of pictures here. Some of these are totally unique. Some of them are just enhancements of the current stuff you can buy, like trout spinners. There's a lot of different trout spinners, but I use my own beads and paint my blades and do a bunch of other stuff to make them my own. Found a way to put spinners on jigs, flies on spinners. The pistol jigs are my own design. That's molding a wire into the actual jig head, and after they're painted, then I add the beads and the blades up front, and using those little propeller blades, they spin like crazy with even just the slightest motion, so they really do work well. Jingle jigs are adding the beads and the blades and the wire after the jig head is finished, and so it swings freely. But again, you can use Colorado blades, propeller blades, any kind of blade you want, but it's an easy to make design that most people can make fairly easy, and they do work. Bottom left corner is wire jigs. That's where you pour a wire into the jig head rather than a hook, and the wire that comes out the back you use to add beads and blades and a hook. Kind of a takeoff on the Whistler jig that a lot of people have used for walleye, and these work well for walleye and a lot of other species too. And the ones on the right, just kind of an afterthought one day. That's why I call them no-name jigs. I didn't know if they'd work or not, but they're spinner body blades that I pounded flat with a wire in them, and then on the end I put a little Colorado blade and a hook. Now the blade doesn't actually spin, but when you vertical jig them, they flutter and flash and are very effective. Larger stuff, you can make any kind of a spinner bait you want, and you can dress those with skirts. You can use plastic grubs, shad bodies, or you could even just put a whole night crawler on there and fish them that way. They work pretty good that way. Now the one on the left, the little mini spin, you can't buy the small stuff in the stores, but when you make your own, you can make them as big or as small as you want and whatever design you want. And these little things really work well for crappie and some of the other smaller panfish, but they also catch some big trout, some walleyes, even some big catfish on them. At the bottom, we've got the buzz baits. Those are popular with bass anglers, but they also work well for northern pike and some other larger fish that will hit bigger, noisy baits on the top of the water. Now, after this segment, I'm going to do a couple segments on the tools and materials that you'll need if you want to get into making your own spinner baits, and that'll be fairly interesting to some people, I'm sure. And after that, then we get into the actual video step-by-step how-to process on how to make some of these individual lures. So you probably find that interesting even if you never get into making your own stuff. Now the grand finale in this video is going to be several minutes of fish porn, showing silly fish of several different species that actually munch this stuff that I make and have the incriminating evidence hanging out of their mouths. So that should be a fun segment. And anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Okay, let's talk about the tools and materials needed to make these pretty little lures that we've been talking about. What you don't need is to spend $100 on a wire forming tool. A lot of guys do, but they find that it has its limitations and usually not worth the money that they spend. All you really need are 4 basic tools that you might already have in your arsenal. Some kind of wire cutters. You need a pair of round nose pliers. This is probably the most vital because that's what you need for making the pretty little round loops without using the $100 wire former. And you need a pair of pliers for holding on to the loops while you finish them on jig heads and hooks, and wire nippers in order to trim the tag end of the wire so it's a nice clean connection. You'll also need stainless steel wire. You can buy it in spools or rolls, several different ways. You can buy a lot of different sizes. I usually get the 30-foot rolls of size 9 and size 10, which are 0.022, 0.024 inches. And those are over 100-pound tests. So even though they're a fairly light wire that's easy to work with, they're plenty strong. You're not going to break it on your 10 or 12-pound line. Assorted spinner blades. You don't need everything in the catalog, but there are a few that you'll want, and I'll detail those a little more in a couple of minutes. Spinner bodies, same thing. There's a lot of them that are available already ready-made in different sizes and weights. And with both spinner bodies and spinner blades, I make mine and also do some painting, which we'll cover. Clevises are the little wire goodies that connect the spinner blade onto the wire shaft so that it spins freely when you pull it through the water. And one of the recent innovations has been a quick change clevis that you can put on and allows you to change your blade whenever you want. And that's been a real boon to the walleye guys because they're always looking for the hot color for the day or even for the hour. You'll need some little metal beads. Now, these look huge in the picture, but the small ones are 1/8 of an inch, and the next size up is 5/32 of an inch. Those are about the only 2 sizes I use. These are bearings on your swivel to let the swivel blade swing freely without getting hung up on a haywire twist knot or something. The colored beads, you'll probably end up with 3 or 4 colors of those that you want to use, especially if you're making trout spinners or walleye spinners, but you don't need every known color. Rivet bearings, you'll need these if you are making buzz baits. It's especially good with the large buzzbait blades, but you can get by with a round swivel, but these work better. Crane swivels have 2 applications. One is for building into the top of a regular spinner to reduce line twist while you're fishing. The second part is on the larger spinner baits. These are used to attach the blade to the wire form so that they spin freely and work very well at that. Hooks, you can use any kind of hook you want. Most commercial models come ready-made with treble hooks, and for the average fisherman, treble hooks are fine because they do help hook short-striking fish and that type of thing, but they also tend to hook your flesh in your clothes and your net a lot more, and they can also do more damage to the fish if you're planning to release the fish. I like the ring eye hooks, especially if I'm using bait. It's a lot easier to put the bait on, take the bait off. When you hook a fish on a ring eye hook, it tends to hold a little better during the battle than a treble hook, and it doesn't hook you or your gear as much, and it also is a lot easier to release a fish. You could even clip the barb down on them if you want. Spinner blades, I said we'd talk about those a little bit more. Okay, most of these are in a nickel finish. You can also get most of them in a brass or gold finish, and they all work well in specific applications. I use the Colorado blade more than any of the others because it spins very freely at slower speeds, and it has a good thump or vibration in the water that calls in the fish. Now, the Colorado blade, I use both the hammered finish and the smooth finish. French blades are almost as good as the Colorado for functioning well at lower speeds. And you find these a lot on the MEPS spinners, if you've ever used a MEPS. Next, inline blade is so-called because the wire shaft goes right up through the blade without a clevis, and the blade spins freely on the wire shaft. And these work very well. I use a lot of them, and you'll find these are what's on Panther Martin spinners. Willow leaf spinners, they work great. The only difference between them and a Colorado spinner is you have to move them through the water a little faster to get them to moving properly. but these are the blades that you'll find on rooster tails and some other lures. Propeller spinners are absolutely great. I use them on a lot of my little trinkets. They move very easily with very little motion in the water, and if you're fishing them on a vertical presentation like ice fishing, they spin both on the lift and the drop, which makes them a lot more attractive to the fish. Smile blades are a fairly recent innovation in the spinner blade market, and because they're not made of metal, they're lightweight, and with that shape they spin very well in even very slow speeds. Walleye guys love them. Buzz baits, primarily used in making actual buzz bait lures, but you can also string them on the head of a hard bait or something, anything that you want to work on the surface and make a lot of noise. Painted blades, at the bottom you'll see I paint a lot of my own blades, and I've got my favorite colors that I use. But if you don't have the stuff to paint the blades or don't have the ambition or the talent, you can buy them pre-painted. You can either get them all one color like the Colorado blades pictured, or you can get a whole bunch of different fish catching colors like the walleye blades. And usually you don't have to pay an awful lot extra money to get the painted blades, and a lot of them work very well, so they're worth considering. Here's a quick reference guide for spinner blade sizing. I use mostly size 0, 1, and 2 on my smaller stuff like Roadrunners and Jingle Jigs. Occasionally I use size 3 to size 5 on larger spinner baits, but I don't use anything larger than that. Back to spinner bodies, I pour and paint my own. The ones that come out of the mold are the plain lead ones on either side of the quarter, but then I have a lot of different color combinations that I paint up the bodies with, and they work well. If you need a reference guide for some of the better colors, this should help you out. These are the ones that I use the most. That pretty well covers the tools and materials necessary for making your own spinner lures. Now the rest of this is going to be devoted to actual video how-to on how to make some of the little lures that we've been talking about. That's where the fun begins. Okay, if you're going to be making your own spinner jigs, one of the first things you'll have to learn is working with wire. And once you know how to make your own loops and fancy bends, there's no limit to the number of different special spinner lures you can make with this stuff. The good news is you don't have to go out and spend $100 on one of those fancy wire forming tools. And actually you're limited with that. You can't do a lot of the bends that you need to do to make the kind of lures that I make. So all you need are 4 basic tools. You need a good pair of cutters. Now these are fairly heavy duty. If you're only working with light wire, you can get by with a lighter pair of nippers. The main thing is you want to be able to cut the wire that you're using. The next tool is the round nose pliers, and this is what's used for making the loops in the wire without using a expensive wire forming tool. The next tool is kind of semi-optional. The little bent nose pliers, you can actually get by with a good set of long nose pliers with a fine point on them, but I prefer these, and I'll demonstrate that in a few minutes how they use those. And the last thing is a good pair of nippers for clipping off the wire very close when you've completed making a haywire twist, so that you don't have any rough ends hanging out. Next part of the discussion is the wire itself. Now the wire comes in a lot of different formations and sizes. This was about a 1/4 pound roll. I get it in 30-foot rolls. You can buy it on a spool. You can buy pre-cut lengths. There's a lot of ways you can buy the wire. Now, as far as size, this is fairly heavy here. This is a .40, which is usable for making spinner baits and some other heavier lures. The size that I use the most for making my little small spinner lures is number 9 wire, and this is .022 inches. And I sometimes go up to size 10 or larger with .024, .026. This is as heavy as you need for most small lure applications. And you begin by cutting off a short length with your good clippers. And the next step is taking your long nose or round nose pliers and you start about an inch or so down from the end. You bend about 30 degrees forward, and still holding it very firmly, bend that short length back up over the top until it's roughly parallel with the first length. Now you take the pliers and switch them and put the bottom part of the pliers into the loop. Continue pushing that tag end around until it's roughly perpendicular to the shaft, and then about 1.5 to 2 turns around the shaft. This is called a haywire twist. And what you'll be left with is this is sticking out about perpendicular to the loop, which makes it a lot easier to take your nippers and go right in close. Make a nice clean cut. And that's a nice round loop that you didn't have to spend $100 for a wire forming tool to get. Okay, the next example will be attaching a hook. And you'll be doing this if you're making regular spinners. You'll be using either a plain hook or a treble hook. Both of them have a ring eye, so the process is the same. And again, once again, you start by bending the wire forward about 30 degrees, bringing the tag end back over the top until it's almost perpendicular or parallel, and then switch the pliers so that the bottom end is in the loop. Grip it firmly. Bring the tag end vertical to the wire. Okay, now this is where that other pair of pliers comes in. But the first thing we do is take the tag end, push it through the loop in the hook, and pull the hook into the loop on the wire. Next step is to use this pair of pliers, and you can see how that works now. Grip that loop firmly and continue the haywire twist while you're holding that loop, and get it about 1.5 turns so it's perpendicular. Again, take your nippers, nip the wire off close, and there you have the hook well attached to the wire. Now the next example is just about the same thing, only we'll be attaching a lure. And there's several of the lures that I make that rely on using a pre-made jig head. And we start the same way, 30-degree bend forward, bring it back up over the top, change to the bottom of the pliers, make the loop so it's 90 degrees. Okay, now let's take this wobble jig head, push the wire through the loop, and this one we're going to have to pull on a little bit, I think, to get it to pop into that. Okay, now it fits into the loop. Okay, once again, we take our long nose pliers, hold the wire firmly, try to keep from hooking yourself. Do about 1.5 good turns. Take your nippers, clip off the wire. Okay, and there you have another lure firmly attached to the wire leader. Now, at this point, you can put on your beads and your blades and whatever else you need to do, and continue making your new spinner lure. Pretty simple, huh? Okay, well, that's basic wire bending 101. Now we'll have a lot of other different applications that I'll show you as we make each of the different examples. But this is all you really need to get started. Okay, now let's get into making regular old spinners. This is where a lot of guys start and where a lot of guys stop. They figure once they got this down, they don't need anything else. But if you get real crazy, you'll end up making a whole bunch. These are the nickel finish. These are the brass finish. Again, there's a whole bunch of different ones there, and they all work at different times, different places. And in order to make all those spinners, you need a bunch of spinner blades. This is an assortment of basic nickel blades that you can buy online or in the stores. And you can get just as many of the brass. I just didn't have a box to show you. And because I paint a lot of my blades, I end up with boxes with a lot of painted blades in them. And all of these, again, I use for spinners that work. That was the lighter colored ones. These are the brass and brighter colored chartreuse and all that. But again, here's a partial selection of my blades. Now, along with the blades, you'll need spinner bodies. And these are some of the ones that you can buy ready-made, both in nickel and brass, different sizes and shapes. They all work. I use them all. But then I also paint a lot of them. And these are some of the painted bodies that I make. And again, they all work. Now, the last of the major components is going to be blades, or beads rather. Here's one box of beads, a lot of chartreuse, a lot of orange, a lot of red. These are glow for making walleye lures. So you're not limited on your colors there. I also make a lot of my own beads, surprise, surprise. I buy these beads at Hobby Lobby, and then I put a glitter coat on them. Really makes some great walleye stuff. Okay, that pretty much covers the basics in material, except for the wire. We talked about the wire before. Now the wire is, this is 0.022, and even though it's fairly fine wire, it works very well for most of the spinners that I make. Okay, the first spinner that we're going to make will be a trout spinner, and we'll be using a Colorado blade that I've got silver glitter and red spots, a matching painted body with silver and red spots, a red bead, and a treble hook. To begin with, we take the wire, as with all beginnings. Take about an inch or so, bend it forward, bring it back over the top, switch the pliers, round nose pliers to the bottom, bring it around to a right angle. Okay, and the first thing we do is put the hook on it. Take the treble hook, put it through the loop. Take the angle nose pliers, hold the loop, do the haywire twist without getting yourself hooked on the hook. And the nippers, clipping it off. And there we have the treble hook on the wire. Okay, the next step is to put our bead on. This is about a 11 millimeter hot red bead. Works very good on the trout spinners. Find the hole, poke the wire through. Next step is to put the spinner body on there. This is about a 1/4 ounce. Okay, put the spinner body. The next step is a 5/32 ounce hollow metal bead. You can roll it around until you find the hole. Put the hot metal bead on there. Okay, now we'll be putting the spinner blade on, and we'll be doing that with a clevis. So we take this little clevis, And using these pliers to hold it, which makes it easier, insert it into the blade, hold it stationary with your fingers, take the wire, push it bottom to top up through the 2 holes in the clevis. Be sure to hit both of them. Okay, now the next step is to take a 1/8 inch round hollow metal bead, find the hole, let it slip on, and that's pretty much it except for the final loop finish. Now we'll be putting a little crane swivel on there on the end to help prevent the line twist. So first we'll make the loop up and over, change the pliers, bring the wire back around. Okay, now put this crane swivel on here, and that will help reduce line twist when you're fishing it. Okay, again, put it on the loop, get the little angle end pliers, hold it steady, about 1.5 twists around. The nippers, cut the wire off flush, and there you have a very effective trout spinner using a Colorado blade with both the blade and the body silver glitter with red spots, and the swivel on the end. Simple, huh? Okay, now we'll make a spinner on one of the inline spinner blades, which doesn't require the use of a clevis. And as with the others, we start with a piece of pre-cut wire, do the 30-degree bend, bring it back over the top, change the pliers into the loop, bring it around to the perpendicular, and we'll use another treble hook on this one. This will be a little smaller because it's a smaller spinner. Make sure it fits into the loop. Use the angle nose pliers. Trim off the tag end. Okay, now we have the hook firmly attached to the wire. The next step is to put on our choice of beads. In this case, I'll be using an orange bead. And we'll be making what I call my traffic light spinner, which is a great spinner for many species. Okay, this is the spinner body. Gold glitter with the red, green, and yellow spots. Okay, that's on there. The next step is the 5/32 inch bearing bead. Okay, the next step is we don't need a clevis on this one because the wire goes right up through the blade and it spins freely. We will, on top of that, we'll put one of the 1/8 inch hollow metal beads. Okay, that's that. And then the finale will be, again, to put a swivel on the top to cut down on the twisting during fishing. And to do that, we start again by making a loop, forward 30 degrees, back over the top, bring it around to 90 degrees, and put the swivel loop through there. Pull it tight down into the loop. Get the angle nose pliers. Hold that loop. 1.5 turns in the haywire twist. Clip the wire off, and we have a completed traffic light spinner, and very effective. Not so hard, was it? Okay, let's talk about spinner jigs. Jigs work very well by themselves a lot of times. Spinners work very well by themselves. But when you make a totally separate lure by adding a spinner onto a jig, it makes a lure that's very effective sometimes, even better than either of the original parents of the model. Now, there's a couple of different ways of making spinner jigs. The first one is to modify a jig mold so that you can pour a wire right on the hook and end up with something that you can make a jig out of, and you can make up a bunch of those in advance, so you got something to work with. The next step, after you got the head molded, is you paint it up whatever color you want, and again you can make up a bunch of them in advance in the different colors that you use, so all you have to do is add the beads and the blades, and what you'll end up with is either a dress jig with the spinner on it, or you leave it plain as is and you can fish it with plastics. Now the other option for making a spinner jig is to take a jig that's already made, either dressed or plain for fishing with plastics, and tie a piece of wire on it and then add the beads and blades on that. So we'll demonstrate both methods. Okay, the first spinner jig we'll make will be for fishing plastics, and this one has had the hook eye removed because it's not necessary. We'll be using the wire for that. And the first thing we do, we don't need a lot of beads and baubles on there, but I like to put at least one bead, in this case a shiny nickel plated bead, if I can find the hole in it. Okay, there we go. And then the next one will be a slightly smaller nickel bead, which is the 5/32 inch blade. And then let's put one on with the clevis. We'll take a French blade and a clevis, and using a pair of angle nose pliers, we'll hold the clevis if we don't keep dropping it. Having a tough time here. Okay, so now we take the clevis and hook it through the hole in the spinner, and next we take the jig head, wired jig head, and push it up through the two holes in the clevis, being sure to hit both of them, because it won't work if only one of them is poked. Okay, there we go. Okay, the last thing we do is put one of the 1/8 inch metal beads on the top. That presents a good bearing so that it rotates freely. And that's your spinner for fishing plastics. And now we just finish it up with a finishing loop, like we always do. 30 degrees forward, back over the top. Change the pliers. 90-degree angle. 1.5 wraps. and finish it up. Okay, here's a spinner jig for fishing plastics. Fish a 3-inch chartreuse plastic on that, and you've got a really good lure. Now, the next thing we'll show is how to make a spinner jig just by adding the wire onto an existing jig. So we start that off with making the loop to hook onto the finished jig head. Again, over the top, around the bottom, create a 90-degree loop. Okay, and we push that through the eye of the jig. Pull it into place. Has to be on that loop. Okay, we got that. And again, using the angle nose pliers, grip the loop 1.5 times around. With the nippers, trim that off. Okay, we'll do the same thing. We'll put a larger shiny bead on. Then we'll put a 5/32 bead on. This is the bearing bead for the spinner. Okay, now on this one, let's use an inline spinner blade, not using a clevis. So again, we got the hole in the spinner blade. We push the wire up through it. We finish it off with a 1/8 inch hollow brass bead. Okay, that's all assembled. Now we just finish it off with the loop on the top. Again, bend it forward 30 degrees, back over the top, around a 90-degree angle, 1.5 wraps. And trim it off. Okay, now this is the equivalent of what I call a jingle jig, because it's an add-on spinner using the eye of the jig rather than molding the wire into the jig. And this can be very effective. It's especially good when it's vertically jigged, because this thing rattles and flashes and creates quite a commotion. But it's also good on the retrieve. You can fish it any way you want. Point is, it's now a totally different lure. Okay, let's talk about spinner flies. As I mentioned in my introduction, I started putting spinners and flies together many long years ago, after I first started tying flies and had some that'll actually catch fish. And over the years, I'd like to think that both my fly tying and my spinner making have improved, and I've combined the two a lot, have a lot of different patterns that work very well on different waters for different species. Basically 2 types of spinner flies that I make. Number 1 starts with putting a wire on a hook and tying a fly on the wire, and then making a rigid spinner fly combination with the spinner and the wire. And I've got several of those here in different colors. The second type is tying a fly and then putting beads and blades on a wire on the fly. I've got quite a few of those that I use also. The only advantage to this one is the fact that the fly swings a little more freely and might add a little bit more action in some cases. But if you're pulling a spinner through the water and it has a fly trailing behind it, it'll probably stay pretty rigid anyway. But anyway, we'll demonstrate how to tie both of those. The first spinner fly we'll tie will be on the fly that has been tied onto a wired hook, And this is an easy one to make. We start out by putting a round metallic bead on the bottom, slide it up on the wire. Next will be a pre-made commercially available spinner body. I think this is about 1/8 of an ounce. That goes on over the bead, and that'll give you all the weight you need in most cases for fishing most waters. Obviously, if you're going to be fishing deep or trolling, you can put bigger weights on, but this is good for all-around stream fishing. Next, we'll put on a 5/32 inch hollow metal bead. Okay, this is the bearing bead upon which the spinner will swivel. And let's do this one with a inline spinner blade. Put the line up through the hole in the hook. Top that off with a 1/8 hollow metal bead. Okay, that's pretty well put together. Now we'll go ahead and do the haywire twist finish on it. Again, we grasp it, bend forward 30 degrees, bring the wire back up over the top, change the round nose pliers, bring it around 90 degrees, give it about 1.5 turns, and take our nippers and clip off the end. Okay, that is a finished spinner fly on the wire. Now we'll do one with just the fly, and then add the wire and the beads and the blades. Start out as usual with making the loop over the top. Change the pliers, come around 90 degrees, and we push the tag end wire through the eye of the hook, and we need to pull that so that pops into place on the ring. Then we use these angle nose pliers to grip the loop 1.5 times around. Cut off the tag end, and as before, we start with using a larger metal bead. Good catch, huh? Okay, the metal bead goes on. And then the pre-made spinner body goes on ahead of that. And then the 5/32 inch bearing bead. This is a hollow metal bead. Okay, now let's make a clevis blade for this one. So we'll use, this is a Colorado blade with the hammered nickel finish. And take the clevis that we'll have to put on the blade, get it into the blade, take the wire, push the wire up through the 2 holes in the clevis. Okay, the blade is now attached. We'll put our second bearing bead on there, a little 1/8 inch hollow metal bead. Okay, now all that remains is to go ahead and do the finishing loop. Once again, we'll grasp it 30 degrees forward, bring it back up over the top, Change the round nose pliers from top to bottom, 90-degree angle. One and a half turns. Trim it off flush with the nippers. Fumble Fingers is having a problem here this morning. Okay, so that's clipped off. And there we have a spinner rigged onto the fly instead of a fly rigged onto a spinner. And see how it swings freely? Don't know if it makes a lot of difference, but that's just another way to make them. Okay, let's talk about some of my favorite spinner lure creations that I've come up with over the years. This is the line I call my pistols, or pistol pats, and they're a takeoff on the old Pistol Pete flies that were developed back in Colorado a few years ago using the little propeller spinner blades on the front. I made some of my own flies with them, and they worked pretty well. And since I pour my own jig heads, I thought, why not rig up a jig head so I can put a little propeller blade on that? And I did. And all I had to do was modify my jig mold so I could put a piece of wire in and make it a permanent part of the jig head. And then I dressed up the front with the beads and the blades. And this is what they look like after they're all done, in a lot of different colors. Now the good news is you're not limited to just the wobble head or the minnow head, which I use a lot. You can also use, this is the ultra minnow head, and I do several of them on the round heads. So any of the jig molds that you can modify to take a wire, you can make the pistols out of them. Now one of my favorite all-time pistol lures is what I call my RC Killer, red and chartreuse. And this is one that has a little 1.5-inch chartreuse and red plastic on it, and 16th ounce wobble head, and about a size 2 propeller blade that spins very freely. Now in the final section of this video on the fish porn, you see a whole lot of fish of a whole lot of species of all sizes, even some big ones, that have this little thing hanging out the side of their mouth. So fish do really like them. Okay, now let's get into making a couple of them so you can see how to put them together. It's pretty darn easy. Let's make a couple of pistol jigs. First one we will do is on the minnow head, red glitter, and this is one I use a little chartreuse bead on. Okay, the first thing we do for making one of these things is, if you're going to put any kind of a colored bead on it, that's the first one to put on. Okay, and that chartreuse is really good with that red glitter. Okay, the next bead we put on is a bearing bead for the spinner, so it spins freely. These are always fun to find the hole in these little hollow metal beads. Okay, got that one. Okay, now the really good news about these pistols is they don't take an awful lot of dressing. They're pretty easy. So the very next thing is you put this propeller spinner blade on, and you finish the thing up with a 1/8 ounce hollow bearing bead. And this allows that little spinner blade to spin very easily at just the slightest movement, and on both the lift and the drop. And they spin on the fall too. If you cast them out while they're sinking, they spin on the fall, which is very attractive to a lot of fish. Okay, that's all that's necessary to build one. I'll finish off the loop with a standard 30-degree bend forward, pull it back over the top, change the points on the pliers, bring it around to 90 degrees, wrap it around about 1.5 times on the haywire twist, Try not to get the hook in your hand, which I do all the time. That's smart. Okay, we got that around there. Take the nippers. Okay. So, that's a pistol on the minnow head. Now let's do a quick one on the wobble head. Now, by the way, this red and white wobble head pistol works exceedingly well with gulp minnows. And you put either a small or a 3-inch white gulp minnow on there. And these things are deadly for a lot of different species, especially where you have shad or other minnows that look good. Okay, now here you don't even need a color bead on it. Silver is all you need, so we do start out with the 5/8 inch, or probably 5/32 inch hollow metal bearing bead. Put the propeller spinner right on top of that. The top bearing bead of a 1/8 inch hollow metal bead. I knew we could get it sometime. Okay, that's it. We're ready to finish that thing up and take it fishing. Okay, grip it 30 degrees up over the top. Change the pliers around 90 degrees. One and a half times around. Clip it off. Okay, now we have 2 pistol pads. One on a wobble head, one on a minnow head. And this one you can fish with plastics. It's really good to just put like maybe a 2-inch piece of night crawler on it, or you can even fish a whole night crawler if you want. And again, this one you can fish with plastic, white plastic. You can use the white gulp minnow. It's good for a lot of different things, and when you get into using different colors and different plastics, you find a whole range of different options. Good to have in your tackle box. Let's talk about one of my other favorite little spinner lures. This is what I call a Jingle Jig, made by adding a spinner blade to an existing jig head using either a regular blade or a propeller blade. They both work. Real easy if you don't have a jig mold to make your own jigs, or you're buying all of your own jigs, whatever, and you're not able to pour a wire into a jig head and make the pistol jigs that we've already talked about. This is the quickest and easiest and cheapest way to add beads and blades onto a jig hook and give it that extra attraction of flash and vibration that will get you a lot more strikes. Now, as I mentioned, you can use either the round Colorado blade or the airplane blade, and we'll be showing you how to make each of those. Like the pistols, Jingle Jigs are real easy to make and very effective, so they're well worth putting into your arsenal. And if you want to make some, real easy to do so, and we'll show you how to make 2 different kinds. One with a Colorado blade, and one with a airplane blade. Now, to begin with, do the same thing as we always do. We'll make a loop by bending forward 30 degrees, back over the top, change the nose of the round nose pliers, back out to a 90-degree angle, and then Push that wire point through the eye of the jig. Pull it tight into the loop. Hold the loop with your angle nose pliers. Twist it around until it's flush. Clip it off. Okay, and that has the jig attached to the wire. Now, the next step, you don't need a lot on here, but we do put a color bead. For the chartreuse, I like to use a bright red color bead. And on top of the bright red color bead, put a 5/32 inch hollow metal bearing bead on there. Okay, and then if we're going to do Colorado blade, on these Jingle Jigs, I don't even use a clevis. They work very well just by putting the blade right over the bearing bead and without using a clevis. It's a small blade, but they spin very well. And you finish off with a 1/8 inch round bearing bead, and then we put the finishing loop on it, 30 degrees, back over the top, change the pliers, bring it around to a 90-degree angle, haywire twist 1.5 turns, and cut it off flush. And there we have a Jingle Jig with a Colorado blade spinner. Okay, now we'll do one with the airplane spinner. Get a hold of this wire. Okay, and we'll do this one on a wobble head jig. And we start with the loop. Forward, over the top, 90-degree angle, push the tag end through the eye of the hook on the jig, and this is one of the ones you have to pull it a little bit, get it snap into place, boink. Okay, once that's in place, use the pliers to hold the loop while you finish the twist. Clip it off flush. Okay, now we have our wobble jig head secured to the wire, and as before, we don't really have to put an awful lot on there. Start off with I like an orange blade on this Fire Tiger, an orange bead rather. So we got an orange bead, a 5/32 inch hollow metal bead bearing blade, okay, and then our little airplane spinner goes right on top of that. And last is a 1/8 inch bearing bead. That's pretty much it. I'm going to finish it off with the round nose pliers to make the loop. Now obviously this will go a lot faster once you're used to it and you have the motions down. But initially you don't have to rush through it. Take it slowly and get the right results. And even when you're supposed to know what you're doing, you can get fumble fingers sometimes, especially when there's a hook involved and you're trying to protect your delicate flesh. Okay, we're right down to clipping off the loose wire on the end. And that is a Jingle Jig with an airplane spinner on it. Now these are absolutely great because they move with almost no movement at all in the water. You'll spin wildly. And if you're vertical jigging them, which these things are really good for, the blade will spin both on the lift and the drop. So that can really be great, especially for ice fishing. But anyway, that's two kinds of jigs. One with the Colorado blade, one with the airplane blade. They both work. Give them a try. Okay, now we'll talk about the next lure in the series of make your own spinner lures. And this one is called the rear wire jig. As you can see, the beads in the blade and the hooks are at the back of the jig head. And we'd already talked about the pistol jigs that have the beads and the blades up in front of the jig head, made by inserting a wire in the mold and having it come out the front. Well, these jigs are totally different in that the wire comes out the back, and that's where you put all the decorative stuff. Now, these begin with not putting a hook into the jig mold, but by making a preformed wire with a loop and then a right angle bend, and then fitting this into the jig mold, and then when it's poured and it comes out, it has an eye like a hook eye, but it's just made of wire, and then the wire is out the back. You paint this up, make your jig out of it. And as I mentioned, there's a variety of things you can do with these things. There's a lot of options on which blades you use. This is a glittered Colorado blade. This is an inline blade. A hammered nickel Colorado blade with extra beads. So anyway, there's a lot of different variables. You're not really limited except by your own imagination. Okay, now we'll get into making a couple and showing you how the step-by-step process works. Okay, let's make a couple of rear wire jigs just to show you the physical process and how simple it is. We'll start with taking a ultra minnow head with the loop poured into it and the piece of wire. And the first thing we put on it is the spinner blade, because that's going to rest up against the beads. The next thing we put on there is a little bearing bead, which is the 1/8 inch hollow metal bead. And the next thing we put on is an orange color enhancement bead. Okay, that's about all we do. Now we put the hook on it, and like everything, we start making the loop. 30-degree bend, back over the top, bring it around to 90 degrees, and once we have it at 90 degrees, then we can go ahead and put the hook on. And in this particular case, we'll do a ring eye hook. We start by pushing the tag end of the loop through the ring eye hook, pulling it down firmly into place, using the little angle nose pliers to hold the loop. Make 1.5 turns. Use the nippers to trim off the excess wire, flush with the wire shaft, and that's a little rear wire jig with the propeller blade on it. Easy enough, right? Okay, now let's do one with a Colorado blade. Now, with these, you don't really need a clevis on them because they spin fairly freely and they're small blades. So we put the blade on, the bearing bead, the little 1/8" round metallic bead. And in this particular case, we'll use a hot red accent bead. Again, you're not limited. You can put a whole string of beads on here if you want, and some guys do that. You can put a whole string of beads on here, and that makes it really effective for walleyes. But that's all we need for right now for this demonstration. And now that we've done that, we can go ahead and put the hook on it. Make the old loop, right angle bend. Now you can use treble hooks, ring eye hooks, any kind of hook you want on here. But once again, you pull it down into the loop. It's got that pretty tight, so I have to hold it with the pliers for extra grip. Pull the hook down into the loop, it snaps into place. Hold the loop, turn the wire 1.5 times. Trim it off neatly. And that is a rear wire jig with a Colorado blade on it. So I've got a Colorado blade and an airplane blade. Simple, once you know how to do it. Okay, let's talk about the next entry in the cavalcade of creative trinkets. These I call my no-name lures. How creative is that? The reason I call them no-name is they were kind of developed on a whim, and until they proved themselves, I didn't really put a name on them. But they worked well enough that after a period of time, I just left the no-name lure on them and had a lot of fun with it. Now, these are made from flattening a spinner body that I get out of a spinner body mold, and it has a little hole down through the center that you can push the wire, and then after you've got the wire in it, then you can hammer it flat. Then you can paint the main part, leaving a loop on the front and a wire on the back to put the goodies on. And what you end up with is something like the Swedish pimple or the Northland flicker shad with a little blade. This is a little Colorado blade and a hook on the wire loop. The blade doesn't actually revolve around the shaft, but when you lift and drop it on vertical jigging, it does flash and vibrate, and works very well to call in the fish. If you got a good piece of bait on there, then that seals the deal. And as you can see, I make them in several different colors. My fire tiger, chartreuse, white with a red eye, and this is an especially good one, the red glitter with the chartreuse blade on it. That and a piece of worm or fish flesh, and you really call a fish in. Now, these work so well, after a period of time, when I started making my little pistol lures with the little airplane spinner blade on the front, I thought, why not make up some of those no-name lures with the spinner blade? And I did. And the fact that these things are soft lead, you can put a bend in them, and that adds even more flutter when you lift and drop them. But the little spinner blade, that spins wildly both on the lift and the drop too. So these things have a lot of action to them, and they really work well. And in recent times, I've even taken to, on some of the larger models, fishing deeper in darker waters, I even build in a little rattle chamber on there. I glue that in there and then paint over it. And so you got rattles and a blade and a piece of bait on the end. That usually puts you in fish country. Now, I'm not going to show all the different steps of making all these things because you're using all the same twists and bends and beads and blades and all that I've been talking about. But you can see what the possibility is. As long as you've got your no-name body with the wire through it, you have your choice of what you do on the front and the back. What I will do very quickly is show you how the original no-name is made, just so you can see how simple that is. Okay, we start out with the wire coming out the back here, and we do the loop. Around to the 90-degree mark. Okay, now we do two things. We put the spinner blade on. In this case, I'll use a Colorado blade, a hammered nickel Colorado blade. Those work very well. And then I'll put a hook on behind it. So both the blade and the hook are on the same loop, not revolving around the shaft at all, but they flutter very well when on the lift and the drop, so there's no need for a rotating blade in this particular case. Okay, let's finish up the haywire twist here and finish up this lure. Clip that off. And there we have a no-name with a hammered nickel Colorado blade, ready to take out and introduce to some fish. Okay, now let's talk about spinner baits. And a lot of people, when they think spinner baits, they think of the big, bushy, ungodly spinner baits that the bass fishermen use. And some of them really do use some big, hairy-looking things. Great big blades. Some of them even have double blades. And a combination of the skirt and the trailer, you got about a half pound of stuff they're chucking out to those big largemouths. And they work. But I fish for smaller fish of smaller species. And so consequently, a lot of the stuff I make in brighter colors, with smaller heads, and with smaller blades painted different colors. And they work. In fact, one of the things that I make is even a mini spinner bait. You can't buy these things. It's about an 1/8 ounce weight on a wire with about a size 1 Colorado hammered spinner. And those things will not only catch crappie, white bass, perch, but they also catch some pretty nice size smallmouth and largemouth. Catch a lot of trout on them, catch walleye on them. Even big catfish will smack them sometimes. Now, you can buy pre-made heads poured on wire forms, either painted or unpainted, and then just add your own spinner blades, whatever kind you want. But if you make your own jig heads, you can modify one of your jig molds, or several, and put the wire in them like this, and then all you have to do when this is done is go ahead and make your bends and add your spinner blade. And we'll get into demonstrating that in the next little segment. But once you get rocking and rolling and start making a lot of these things, you can end up with boxes that look like this, full of pre-made stuff. These are all poured and painted and ready to go. Just all we need to do is bend them up and put some spinner blades on them. Well, that's a basic introduction. Now let's make up a couple of these things to show you how it works. Okay, let's do a quick demonstration on how to actually make a spinner bait. And that begins with taking our pre-poured jig head with a wire, and this one I've already dressed up with some fiber and synthetic fur. Makes a nice bright color. But the first thing we do is you put a bend in the wire, about 35 to 40 degrees, so that you've got an angle. Okay, and then most commercial spinner baits have the spinner coming clear back over the hook. Now that helps like for a weed guard maybe, but I like to make the spinner a little farther forward so that the fish, if they strike short, they get the hook. They don't just strike at the spinner blade back here and miss the hook. So we start out by coming up about as far as it's going to take to accomplish that. And you make a line loop to tie the line on, like we do the other loops, back over the top. Now you make a haywire twist here, but you only do one wrap, and you finish it up so that it's about roughly parallel to the line of the lure. Okay, now we'll decide where we want to put that spinner. We'll cut this back off about right here. And we've got a pre-assembled spinner with a crane swivel and a split ring. And so what we'll do up here is we just make a round circle with the pliers, bring it around where it's almost a circle, but still got a little bit of a gap. And we'll put the loop of the crane swivel over that loop. Okay, and now this is where a pair of long nose pliers comes in. Now you squeeze that closed, and we have a spinner bait where the blade doesn't come all the way back to the point of the hook. And this is very effective for a lot of different fish. It will catch bass, it'll catch big trout, it'll catch walleye, but that's basically that one. Now if you want to make smaller ones in order to fish plastic, really good for fishing gulp minnows, whatever, use one of these smaller heads. Again, with the wire, you bend it up to get a little bit of a bend in it to get this out above the hook. And then we'll take it up as far as we think we're going to need it. Well, first of all, let's go ahead and put the bend in it up here. And take it about this far. And again, the wire twist for the loop for the tie the line on. And a one-turn haywire twist. Okay, now you see what it looks like. It's roughly in a straight line with the jig. Okay, here again, we can either just make a loop, or with this lighter wire, I think what I'll probably do is go ahead and make a one-twist haywire loop. So forward, back, over the top, right angle, and again we've got a pre-made, pre-assembled hammered nickel Colorado blade on a small crane swivel. Put the small crane swivel on, hold it with the wires, and just one twist is all you really need on this. That's not going to come undone. And clip off the end. Now we've got a small spinner bait, suitable for fishing plastics, shad bodies, gulp minnows, whatever small thing you want to put there. You can put a small skirt on there if you want. But this, even though it's a small spinner bait, will still catch about the largest fish that you're going to catch out of whatever body of water that you're fishing. These things do work. Okay, buzz baits are the last in the series on making your own spinner lures. These are generally used by bass anglers for making a noisy topwater presentation, but instead of working just for bass, they also catch northern pike and other large fish that like a noisy topwater presentation. Several variables in the size and types of the heads that you can use, and also a variation in the different kind of blades. Some are noisier than others, some have a different spin than others. You can experiment around with them. But you get anything from a bright nickel finish to white painted to clear chartreuse. You can get clear sparkle also. You get metallic, and again, all of them work. But in addition to making regular buzz baits, you can also use buzz bait blades to put on a floating lure. and make a real noisy topwater lure for fish that are hitting the shad. I use these down in Arizona and just absolutely hammered the largemouths and stripers on them down in Arizona. Now, you can buy preformed buzzbait heads already on the wires, ready to go. All you have to do is add the blades and then a skirt, whatever you want on it. And we'll demonstrate how to make one of those. Start out by just running the wire through the appropriate spots on the buzz blade so it's in place. Now, in the section on materials, we talked about the little rivet bearing. So you put that on, and then using your pliers, make a right angle bend in that wire that'll hold that rivet bearing in place. And once that's bent up a little bit, then you take your strong wire cutters and cut that off. And you now have a spinner blade or a buzz bait ready to put on a skirt, whatever you want. Now, if you make your own by pouring wire into a modified jig mold, then you can get any size and shape head that you want on your buzz baits. Now, here's one that I made with kind of a rounded head, and then here's the same one that I've flattened. And these work very well because when they're flattened and you pull them through the water, it tends to help it right up so you can get that buzz bait working on the top, but move it at a little slower speed because it's not as heavy, it's not as prone to sink deep all of a sudden. But what you'll need to do on one of these is just kind of like making a spinner bait. You come up, probably 2 or 3 inches, about 3 inches, and then we'll make a hook loop in the wire. And this is heavier wire, so it helps to have a pair of heavier round nose pliers. Anyway, we get it this way, and then we do the same thing. We bring this up where it's about in a straight line. Okay, and then to put the spinner bait, the buzz bait on there, we need to bend that forward. And then let's put a white one on here. Put the white one through the appropriate holes. And put the bearing, the rivet bearing on it. If I can get a hold of it here. And again, just a quick right angle bend on that to keep the bearing in place. And you can clip that off if you want. But now you have a buzz bait. And if you want to give it a little greater angle, you can. You can adjust the angle on the different bends, but you can customize it to do whatever you want. But that's basic buzz bait technology. It's not complicated, and it's not for everybody, and it doesn't work for all species. But whenever the fish are on top and heading a noisy surface presentation, these are pretty good to have in your arsenal. All right, we've gone through the tools and materials necessary to make your own spinner lures, and we've talked about the actual step-by-step processes for making some of the better ones. Now let's get into the really heavy stuff and show some naked fish pictures of fish that actually fell for all these foolish little trinkets. Rainbow trout are first. They love all kinds of spinner lures. This one ate a red and chartreuse pistol. Here's one that ate the traffic light trout spinner. Here's one that ate a gold spinner fly. Here's one that ate a wired wobble jig. Here's another one on the gold spinner fly. Here's one on the red spotted silver spinner. That's a real good one for trout. Here's one on the deadly no-name lure in a pale perch finish. Here's a nice cutthroat on the red spotted silver spinner. Now, channel cats eat anything, but it's amazing how often they'll eat the little spinner lures. This one ate a small red and chartreuse pistol pat. And here's one that ate the pistol with a white gulp minnow on it. They love those things. Here's one on the deadly no-name lure. And I didn't show this in the how-to section, but once you learn how to work with wire and all that good stuff, you can make your own U-rigs. Take off on the A rig, the Alabama rig. This is one with 3 plastics on it, and some silly catfish that decided he wanted to play with it. Of course, walleye absolutely love spinner lures in many configurations and colors, but that red and chartreuse jingle wobble works pretty good on them. And so does the little no-name lure with the pale perch finish. Here's a big walleye with a small red and chartreuse pistol. You don't necessarily need a big lure to catch a big walleye. Here's a walleye on a spinnerbait, chartreuse with a red eye, good color for a lot of species. Here's a walleye that didn't read the directions and hit a trout spinner in the traffic light finish. Here's another one that hit a trout spinner in the chrome with the red spots, but all applicants eagerly accepted. Here's a walleye that ate a pistol with a gulp minnow on it. That's a really good lure up in Willard Bay. Here's a nice perch with a spinner jig that it ate. There's a perch on a trout spinner in the fire tiger finish. Here's another perch on a red and chartreuse jingle jig. Here's one on a jingle jig on a dart head and the pale perch finish. Here's one on a pale perch finish no-name lure with a piece of worm hanging there. Here's one on a trout spinner in the white and pink color. It's actually a spinner fly combo with a piece of worm. Another perch on a jingle jig, red and chartreuse. Another one on a spinner fly in a different kind of configuration. This is the white with the 3 pink spots and a white spinner fly. Here's a perch caught on a spinner bait that was being fished for smallmouth up at Jordanelle. They got no class. Speaking of smallmouth, here's a nice smallie on a gold spinner with orange spots on it. That's a good color. Here's another smallmouth on the wired wobble jig. Still another one on the jingle wobble in the deadly red and chartreuse color. And here's one on the red and chartreuse with a pistol. They do like that color and they do like the pistols. They also hit spinner baits. This one hit a fire tiger finish spinner bait. Crappie like spinner lures also. This one ate a little pistol with a pistol no-name lure in the pale perch finish. Here's one that eats the deadly red and chartreuse in a pistol. Now, white bass are absolutely ridiculous in all the things that they'll hit. They especially like different spinner lures. This is actually a wiper that ate a white gulp on a pistol wobble. Here's another one on the same thing up at Willard Bay. That's pretty deadly for them up there. Here's a Bonneville whitefish up at Bear Lake, and it ate a jingle wobble and a pale perch finish. That's a good color for them up there. Here's a northern pike on a spinner fly combination. And a lovely chub on a trout spinner. I think this was probably the silver with the red spots. And carp are notorious for hitting all kinds of jigs. They especially like these little red and chartreuse pistols with a piece of worm on them. Okay, now back to the white bass. They eat everything. This one ate a jingle wobble with a orange head and a chartreuse body. This one hit a mini spinner bait, red and chartreuse combination. Here's one that hit a pistol in the red and chartreuse combination. Here's another one that hit a jingle wobble in the chartreuse and red combination. Here's one that hit a spinnerbait being fished for walleye. White bass aren't proud, they'll hit anything they can get in their mouth. This is on a spinner fly combination in the Fire Tiger finish. And last but not least, here's a jingle wobble being fished through the ice that picked up a nice little white bass. Well, that kind of finishes up on the fish porn. Hope you enjoyed the whole video, and hope you can get into making some of your own stuff, and hope it works well for you.